chapter 10. So chapter 10 is about generous. And again, we're going through the different character traits that Shabbos can give to us. Just once again to sort of, reiterate that today's session could be for the Hatzlacha, the success of our Chayalim, of all the soldiers, and the release of the captives in Eretz Yisrael and the land of Israel. And he starts on page 51. Shabbos can help us overcome the most destructive aspects of human nature. Pirkei Avos lists them as jealousy, the desire for physical pleasure, and the pursuit of honor, and tells us that they drive a person from the world. So this is in Pirkei Avos. It is in Perek Daled, the fourth Perek, and it's the 28th Mishnah, Mishnah Chav Ches. It says, Kina hakina v'hataiva v'hakoved meitziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. These three things, jealousy, desire, lust, and the pursuit of honor, could drive a person out of the world. Now, I would think he's going to explain, sort of what this means, but the simple explanation is, if you think about all of these things, each one of them is just related to our imagination, what we call in Hebrew dimyon, our imagination. And unfortunately, a world that a person inhabits can be a world which is purely imaginary, a world that doesn't exist, a world in which one's drives, one may think, are coming from a place which is real. One may think that one is doing something which is a fantastic venture and is really achieving things, but in all honesty, it is just coming from something which is purely a figment of one's imagination. There's no greater example of these than these three things. So kina, jealousy. A person can think that they are driven to do whatever it is because they want to succeed. They're driven to do whatever it is, their job, for example, to succeed in their job, whereas really they're actually just jealous of someone else. And therefore it's all just imaginary. And the same thing goes with kavod, with honor. The person is desiring of honor. What is honor? It's this intangible feeling. Yes, it feels good. Of course it does. But a person can lead their whole life with this imaginary feeling of, if only I would get this. And then, of course, taiva, the desire, the lust. I always think to myself, before the product comes from Amazon, it's always more exciting. But once you actually have it, then it's always like, okay, that was good, but it wasn't as exciting as my imagination made out that it was going to be. Why? That's what taiva is. Taiva, which means lust, by definition, is always, I want more. And therefore, a person who tries and thinks that they will be able to fulfill themselves and feel wholesome and full by fulfilling that desire is making a very big mistake, because it's really insatiable. And as soon as they fulfilled one thing, then it will just be the next. What's the next? What's the next? What's the next? And therefore, all of these things are just living in a world of imaginations. Therefore, a person who's driven by jealousy, by desire, by honor, isn't really living in part of this world. That's what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos means, that it's as if they've driven the person out of this world. And the Chief Rabbi continues, the common denominator here is self-centeredness, begrudging that which pertains to others, which is jealousy, the relentless pursuit of self-gratification, which is desire, and valuing others only in as much as they provide recognition and attention to us, which is the pursuit of honor. Meaning, so it's all about myself. It's all entirely self-centered. He continues that generosity of spirit is the very opposite of selfishness. It is the willingness to give and share, to support and help. Being generous is the capacity to move beyond the self. So it's interesting because we often think as generosity as purely being a physical act. So the generous person is the one who gives to others. Well, actually, what he's saying is the generous person, generosity is a character trait. And when a person has that generosity as a character trait, then it removes that self-centeredness. And therefore, it helps a person to free themselves from being driven by jealousy, by honor, by all of these things, because they have it's a character trait of generosity. Yes, it's developed by giving to others. It could be developed by giving tzedakah, by doing a chesed, by kindness, by that which we do to others. But in fact, the beneficiary is ourselves. Self-centeredness, he continues, is paradoxically self-destructive. It drives a person from the world, meaning from both this world and the next. The commentators explain that jealousy, desire, and the pursuit of honor destroy a person's quality of life. Jealousy wreaks both physiological and emotional damage. It devours a person from the inside. Unbridled self-indulgence can lead to excesses that are damaging to a person's physical and emotional health. The relentless pursuit of honor causes conflict between people, which disturbs one's peace of mind. So again, the person who's out to just succeed for themselves, the self-centeredness, all they want to do is to satiate themselves, paradoxically end up destroying themselves because it's all in the person's imagination. That feeling of if only I had this, if only I was that person, or if only everyone looked up to me, then I would have everything. That is actually self-destructive rather than self-creating. And he continues, these three driving forces within the human being are also the root of much wrongdoing. Jealousy deters people from dealing ethically, compassionately, and sensitively with others. When people are consumed with self-gratification, they act in ways counter to the innate sanctity and dignity with which God has bestowed human beings. And the craven pursuit of honor and recognition drives people to violate their most basic values and principles and to betray their consciousness. Together, they drive a person not just from this world, but from the world to come. Sometimes when we have negative actions that we want to improve upon, especially when it comes to, Rosh Hashanah, and it comes to Yom Kippur, it comes to that time of the year, and we're trying to improve upon our actions, we sometimes fail to realize that the actions are just a symptom. They're a symptom of the midah. So the person who has jealousy, then the actions that they're doing could stem from the jealousy. And what we need to do is actually start with the jealousy. We have to stop and think to ourselves, what am I being motivated by? And the truth is that this is even when we're doing good deeds. Unfortunately, a person could do something which is ostensibly something which is very good and is counted as a good deed, but nevertheless, if they're only doing it in order that they should receive honor, if that's the only reason why the person does something to help someone else so that they can get the recognition and the honor that comes from it, then of course that good deed is tainted and it will encourage that bad midah elsewhere. So we always have to be checking ourselves and asking ourselves. And as he says, that's why these things drive a person not just out of this world because they're self-destructive in this world, but they also lead to so many different averas. They are the root of so many different averas that drive a person from the world to come as well. He continues, something very relevant to all the parashas we've just read in the Torah. The Torah records how these negative forces caused cataclysmic destruction among the early generations of human history. The first sin of history was caused by desire when Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. If you like, the prototype for all desire, because Chava says, the Torah relates that Chava saw the fruit was nechmad ha'etz lema'achal v'ta'avahu le'einayim. It was lustful for the eyes. It was desirable to eat. She knew it was wrong, but she desired it. She had this insatiable appetite for it. And therefore, even though it was wrong, she knew it was wrong. She almost couldn't stop herself. So that's the sin of desire. And the following generation, it was jealousy that spurred Cain to take the life of his brother Abel, whose sacrifices were favored by Hashem, right? Abel's sacrifices, Hevel's sacrifices is accepted. Cain's is not accepted. He's jealous of his brother. The destruction of the flood was brought about by a generation steeped in jealousy, which led to theft, unethical behavior, and even violence, and also self-gratification, expressed in the rampant sexual immorality that characterized that generation. So the generation of the flood, they have two of these things. They have jealousy and also taiva, once again, that self-gratification. The generation of the Tower of Babel suffered their downfall in pursuit of honor, in their obsession with building an enormous edifice to bring themselves fame and glory. Once again, one of those episodes that we read so often, and we almost can think to ourselves, it's detached from us because we're not going to build a big tower like that and go up and fight God. But the essence of what they did wrong was the pursuit of honor. And I would suggest that's something we very much have to battle with. He continues, these forces of self-centeredness can be difficult to overcome because they're ingrained in human nature. In fact, the reason the Pirkei Avos singles out these three specific forces is because God has planted them within us and we are naturally prone to them. At the same time, Hashem has given us the means to overcome these forces and become more generous people. One of these means is Shabbos. So now again, he's going back to if you remember the idea that we said right at the beginning from the based on the Sefer HaChinuch and the Ramban, which is that all of the mitzvahs ingrain within us positive character traits. That's what they're designed to do. And therefore, when we think to ourselves, this kinna, this jealousy and this desire and this pursuit of honor, which are part of the human being, part of the human condition, and we think to ourselves, how are we ever going to change that? just sort of by sitting there and saying to myself, right, I'm not going to do it anymore. That's not going to change it. But what will change it is our actions. And therefore, Hashem gives us the means to overcome these things. And sometimes it's an amazing thing because these things happen slowly, slowly, slowly. One doesn't even realize that each mitzvah is actually improving one's character a little tiny bit until sometimes it takes sort of a jolt when one sees someone else and says, whoa, 1 minute, I used to be like that, or I used to think that way, or I can see this is where he's coming from. It's actually coming from those bad middas. It's coming from those character traits. And sometimes it takes that for a person to realize that actually, meanwhile, I've been improving little by little by little. So one of the key ways in which we can improve on these things is Shabbos. As he continues, Hashem has given us the incredible gift of Shabbos as the counterbalance to jealousy, desire, and the pursuit of honor, symbolized by the 3 holy meals of Shabbos as a force for nurturing generosity within us. So he says, in fact, the 3 meals of Shabbos, they correspond to these 3 negative character traits. How does Shabbos counter these forces of negativity? Page 53. Firstly, Shabbos helps us control and channel our physical desires. We don't repress sensory pleasure. It's a natural part of who we are. We harness it in healthy and positive ways and connect it to sanctity and a higher purpose. When physical desire controls us, we become overwhelmed by it, unable even to enjoy it. But when we can control physical desire, it brings us joy. So Shabbos is the primary way, he says, that we can channel the physical desire. And this is one of the most fundamental ideas of Judaism, that we don't preach asceticism. We don't say that you should negate all physical pleasures. We enjoy food. We enjoy other pleasures that Hashem gives us in life. But what we do say is to channel them. I always remember when we lived in Jerusalem, in Har Nof, had the privilege to live there for 10 years. And there was one of the workers in this supermarket, in a supermarket there called Yesh. And on Erev Shabbos, he would sort of tell everyone that when you're buying your food for Shabbos, you're going around shopping on Friday morning, Thursday night, he would say to us, say Lekoved Shabbos. Say you're buying this in honor of Shabbos. And that uplifts something as simple as a shopping trip, is uplifted because you say you're buying it Lekoved Shabbos. And to this day, when I go shopping with the kids, sometimes I say to them, we're buying Lekoved Shabbos. We're buying something for Shabbos. And then what happens is it changes. Suddenly that shopping trip is a religious experience. It's a deeply religious experience. It's me taking this world, the physicality of this world, the materialism of this world, and I'm suddenly uplifting it into an entirely different place. Shabbos is the perfect way to do that. It's a mitzvah to enjoy ourselves on Shabbos, which means, the Gemara says, to enjoy good food. It means to enjoy good company. It means to have a nice bottle of wine and a nice steak. All of that. Why? Because we're taking it, we're uplifting it and using it for Shabbos. So that's the first thing. Shabbos says to us, the physical desire is not something which is going to be squashed. It's not something which we're not going to have at all, but it's something which we have to learn how to control and to channel for good things. He continues that Shabbos also helps us to overcome jealousy. It does this by ingraining in us trust in God, symbolized by the 2 challahs on the Shabbos table for each of the meals, which remind us of how he looked after our ancestors in the desert. Right? The 2 challahs remind us of the double portion of man that the Jewish people received just before Shabbos. Trusting in Hashem entails a belief in a world of abundance, that everything is the way it should be by divine plan, that what we have is what we need, and what others have is what they need. By making peace with our lives and what we have in this way, we can overcome the forces of jealousy. The Chofetz Chaim, actually, in his Sefer, in his book Ahavas Chesed, he puts it very succinctly, and he says that if we truly believed in God, we would never be jealous of anyone else. We would never be jealous of anyone else, because I have what I'm supposed to have, because that's what God gave to me, and they have what they're supposed to have, because that's what God gave to them. And therefore, when the Torah actually commands us not to be jealous, one of the 10 commandments, no less, then what it's saying is actually work on your emunah. We need to work on our faith in God, and we need to realize what's mine is supposed to be mine, what's yours is supposed to be yours. And again, there's no better time than Shabbos to remind us of that. The very act, the very fact that a person is not allowed to engage in their work, in their commerce, especially nowadays when you could work 7 days a week very easily in almost any job. And there's always more work that could be done, and working from home, etc., etc. So the very fact that we say we're not going to do that for 24 hours, we're going to stay off the emails, the laptop, and all of the things that we could do which would make more money, that is saying we trust in Hashem that we'll be fine, that as a family, we'll be okay. We don't need that extra money that we're going to bring on the Shabbos by working on that 7th day. So it gives us that bitachon, that trust in Hashem. And lastly, he continues, Shabbos also helps us to contain our need for honor and recognition. Shabbos cultivates humility in us. It helps us to recognize God's greatness, thereby enabling us to set aside our pursuit of honor. Being humble is recognizing that we are not superior to others. We're all equal, created in God's image, and therefore honor and recognition are illusory, and any attempt to lord over others is sheer vanity. Meaning the last and final one, which is the pursuit of honor, when we realize God's greatness and we realize that, let's take a step back, this is God's world. God created this world, and we are fortunate to live in it, but we don't run the world. That puts us in our place. And real humility, as we may have said before, but it's a very, very fundamental idea. Real humility is not thinking that I'm a nothing, but rather it is knowing my place in the world. And it's recognizing that any of the talents I have are to be used for the good, only to be used to help others, but they're having that humility to know that Hashem is the one that runs the world and not me. And therefore Shabbos, once again, this is something which Shabbos imbues within us. And he ends off, Shabbos is the divine formula to help us overcome the three destructive forces of jealousy, desire, and honor, rooted in self-centeredness. Shabbos nurtures within us the counterforce to selfishness, a spirit of generosity and benevolence, of transcending the self. That completes chapter 10. And we will now continue with some Tehillim. Once again,